A man set out just to buy flour and nails. But when he looked into the eyes of the three girls being sold, he chose justice over silence. And that choice shattered the order of an entire town. We're just a few steps away from reaching our first 1,000 subscribers, our growing family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you to everyone who's brought us this far. With your support, we grow stronger with every story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. The first light of morning had barely touched the ground when Marcus Adler pulled the reins of his tired horse and arrived at the square, where the crowd had fallen into an oddly heavy silence. The air smelled of dust and iron. Smoke rising in the distance blended into the sky in a thin line, while a hushed stillness reigned over the square, the kind of silence one never forgets after hearing it once. Marcus had only set out to buy a few nails and a bag of flour, but this silence was calling him to something else, either to bear witness or to betray. He stopped. A low wooden platform stood in the center of the square. It wasn't a gallows or a market stall, yet something inside Marcus whispered that something was dying there. Three girls stood on it, barefoot, in plain and dirty dresses, eyes shut tight to the world. Behind them, nailed to wooden signs, were the words, $7 or best offer. Good at sewing and cooking. No names, no families, no pasts, just a price, as if they weren't human, but objects. One of the girls had her hair pulled tight into a thick braid. Another hid behind the curtain of her hair falling over her shoulders. The youngest, who Marcus guessed was under 20, had her eyes tightly closed as if the world no longer held any interest. A man in the crowd, tilting his cylindrical felt hat, called out, $5. Who says 6? Speak up, gentlemen, they won't bite, unless you skip the extra payment. Some men laughed. One of the women gave a slight shake of her head, but didn't move. Marcus' right shoulder, still carrying the memory of a bullet from years ago, began to ache again. This square, this day, this crowd. It reminded him of his wife's death, of the years that passed in silence, of the walls of a house that never grew with sons. With a burning knot in his throat, he got off his horse. The crowd tensed a little. The man running the auction noticed Marcus. You, sir? Looking for help? Name your number, and we'll settle right away. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't look at the laughter or the mockery. He walked toward the platform, the boards creaking under each step. When he reached the front, he raised his head and took off his hat. I'll pay, he said, his voice dry and rough like a knife scraping over stone. 7. For each one. For the first time, the three girls lifted their heads. The one with the braid, the eldest, narrowed her eyes at Marcus. Was this man just another predator, or simply a madman? The middle girl looked away after a brief glance. The youngest still didn't look. Maybe she had seen too much already. Cash, said Marcus, pulling out the leather pouch tied to his belt. A wallet he hadn't touched in 10 years. He counted out the silver coins passed down from his father, $21. His hands didn't tremble, but a voice echoed inside him. You're soft, son. The soft get crushed. Maybe, but some things should never harden. When he handed over the money, the crowd fell quiet. The sheriff watched from a distance, but didn't meet his eyes. No one stopped him. They just watched, especially the ones who always looked for a reason to hate. Opening a brothel, Marcus? Someone shouted. No reply. Marcus never answered questions like that. As the girls stepped down from the platform, they still seemed in disbelief. But the eldest grabbed the other two by their arms and held them close. As Marcus walked, he handed them a second rope, so they'd walk side by side, not to be dragged. No one spoke along the way. No one said thank you. There was no need. Behind Marcus' horse, the three of them walked like ghosts. Had they been saved, or simply chained anew? No one could tell. One of them hissed without looking at him. You didn't even ask our names. Marcus didn't turn his head. In time, he said simply. First, shelter. But the shelter, like the town's silence, was only the beginning of this story. When the gate of the ranch creaked open, all three girls stopped. They didn't go in. Marcus headed to the barn, untied the horse, and led it to the haystack. Then, without meeting their eyes, he said a single sentence. This is my place. The roof doesn't leak. The water's clean. There's food. But I didn't buy you. I paid that money because you had no other way out. His words hung in the air. At last, the tallest one, the one with braided hair, answered. Her voice was almost a cold whisper. So what are we now? Servants? Guests. Prisoners. Marcus replied without looking away, slow and firm. Your guests. For now. What comes next is up to you. Then he went inside, leaving the door open. He lit the fire, sliced old bread, put canned beans into the oven. Marcus wasn't one to talk much, but a warm room often said more than words. When he looked out the window, the three of them were still standing at the door, not looking at each other, until the middle one gently nudged the youngest forward. The little girl took one step, then another. Eventually, they entered. They still had no names, but Marcus was beginning to tell them apart. The oldest, the one with the braid, always carried the weight of past disasters in her posture. The middle one moved while carefully glancing around, trying to figure out the meaning of every object, every motion. The youngest always stayed behind, hands clasped together, as if trying to become invisible. That night, Marcus left the house to them. He didn't close the door, but he didn't offer his bed either. He lay down in the barn, on top of the straw, under an old blanket. Just before falling asleep, a shadow approached. The woman stood beside him. Without speaking, she gently laid another blanket over Marcus. I'm not cold, Marcus murmured. Her reply was soft. You're not warm either. She turned to leave, then stopped, as if she couldn't decide. Then she spoke. I had a brother. They sold him too. And then she left quietly. Marcus stared at the beams on the ceiling. His mind lingered on the woman's words and the eyes of the town. Because this wouldn't just be a rescue story. That town didn't forgive kindness. And Marcus knew that all too well. The next morning, he got up before sunrise, lit the stove, mixed cornmeal, arranged the old plates. He didn't wake them. There was a stirring inside him, but it wasn't a prayer, more like a quiet readiness. When he stepped outside, his hands were frozen, his breath fogging the air. To clear his mind, he started mending the fences. Meanwhile, inside, the rhythm of life had shifted. When he came back in, the floors had been swept, the dishes washed, the blankets neatly folded. On the windowsill sat a glass jar filled with purple clover, a pinch of yellow flowers, and a small feather tucked between, a silent thank you. Outside, he found the oldest one trying to chop wood with a dull axe. Marcus watched for a moment, then gently took the axe from her hand and handed her a sharper one. She looked straight at him, with the kind of gaze only women who've faced years of men's rage carry. I'm Marcus, he said simply. Marcus Adler. She narrowed her eyes and nodded slightly. I'm Lynn. Marcus turned to the other two girls. The middle one was mending the hem of her skirt with her hands. She looked up, timidly. May, she said. The youngest one stared at him without looking away. Marcus didn't move, didn't break eye contact. You don't own me, she said. I never claimed I did. After a short pause, she muttered, Sue. That afternoon, the silence of the house changed. Lynn scrubbed the porch until it shone. May muttered in a language unknown to her as she picked weeds out of the horse's mane. Sue climbed to the barn roof and never came down. By evening, his sons returned, Lucas, Eric, and Daniel. Marcus met them in the barn. The subject came up without delay. The girls still here? Lucas asked. Yes, Marcus said. I fed them. They worked. Told me their names. Eric chuckled. Great. Guess the family's growing. Marcus stood up slowly. If they stay, it'll be on their own terms. Just like you did. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You want us to marry them? You know what this house has been missing, Marcus said quietly. What's missing isn't love. It isn't help. It's respect. If a man understands what he places before God, he won't be ashamed of it. That night's dinner was different. Lynn added ginger and onions to the stew. May made flatbread on the edge of the pan. Sue hadn't cooked anything, but stood through the entire meal, arms crossed, leaning against the wall, watching the sons, not like she might run, but like she might fight. That night, Marcus said only one word. Peace. Lynn looked up and replied. To new names. And the glasses clinked. But as night fell, a lonely sound of footsteps rose from the back of the barn. Sue dug into the earth. A gun was retrieved from where it had been buried. But this time, it wasn't to run. It was to stay. And this house was no longer just a shelter. It had become a battlefield. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the ground was already filled with hardened footprints. While Marcus was fixing the fences, he noticed Sue circling the house on horseback, and Eric watching her carefully from a distance. The silence was no longer inside the house, it was around it. Because outside, the town was talking. The first sign came when Lynn dropped her basket of eggs while returning from the morning market. The scratch on her palm was fresh, but her expression was calm. "A child threw a stone," she said. "Missed." She paused, then added, but the words hit their mark. That same day, May came in with her eyes red. She held a crumpled piece of paper. When Marcus opened it, written in messy ink were the words, "Protect our women. Keep the blood pure." The flyer was from the church revival, but the words were far too deliberate to deny. From that day on, Sue refused to go into town. She started waking up early and riding far away, fast, furious, as if she were chasing her memories. When Marcus warned her one day, she spat the words without waiting for a reply. "Let them come. I won't be sold again. But if someone tries to take me this time, I'll cut them up with my own hands." After that, Daniel began to watch her. Quietly, not like a guard, but like someone confronting his own darkness. They barely spoke to each other, but Sue allowed him to ride beside her, which, for her, was a sign of acceptance on its own. Inside the house, things were changing slowly but steadily. Lynn and Lucas stayed out longer each day when they went to check the fences, developing a quiet kind of harmony between them. They didn't need each other, but being together filled a rhythm that had long been missing. May, on the other hand, would hum while cooking at night, and Eric tried to learn the meaning of her words. When he mispronounced them, May smiled, corrected him, and returned to her song. That little exchange made Eric feel, for the first time in his life, like he was part of something tender. But outside, a different language was being spoken. One Sunday morning, a new notice was posted on the church board. Marcus's name wasn't on it, but everyone knew what it meant. God sets order. Those who mix call ruin upon the land. That week, a wooden sign was nailed to the ranch gate with a single word, "Sold." Marcus took down the sign, said nothing, but his hands were shaking. That night, Lynn found him on the porch. Marcus was staring at the darkened horizon. He didn't even turn his head. "Do you regret it?" Lynn asked. After a long silence, Marcus spoke. "I regret the teeth of the world, but not pulling you out of its jaws." Lynn lowered her head. Her face was just a silhouette in the dark. "Let's leave," she said. Marcus shook his head. "You've run enough. You won't run anymore. This house won't be moved. And these marriages, they'll happen not with the town's permission, but with our resolve." But the town responded to that resolve in its own language. One day, while May and Eric were fetching water by the creek, 3 boys on horseback rode past them. One spat. Another shouted, "Mail order brides." The third threw a stone. It didn't hit May. It struck Eric on the temple. A moment of silence, followed by May's scream. Eric dropped to his knees, blood streaming down his forehead as the buckets rolled away. The boys rode off, laughing. By the time Marcus and Lucas arrived, the boys were long gone. That day, Marcus went to the sheriff's office. His demand was clear. "I want justice." The sheriff took off his hat and sighed. "Kids, Marcus, they'll grow out of it. I was a kid, but I learned to be a man. They're cowards." The sheriff avoided eye contact. "Maybe you shouldn't have brought all this trouble home." Marcus walked out without another word, but the anger inside him looked like ice on the outside. When he returned home, no one at the dinner table was speaking. Eric had stitches on his forehead, May had tears in her eyes, and Sue's gaze burned with fire. Daniel leaned towards Sue and whispered, "They'll hit harder next time." Sue stared back. "Then I won't have empty hands." That night, no one slept. The women were sewing. Not dresses. White ones, plain but intentional. Each one was a symbol of a decision, a defiance. Lynn clutched her dress to her chest and placed it in a trunk. May added lavender inside. Sue, even while sewing, never stopped polishing her knife. And the next day, a platform was quietly being built inside the barn. For marriage, for love, for resistance. The town would never recognize this ceremony. But they didn't need recognition, only to stay, to build, and to stand their ground. Before the planks of the newly built platform had even warmed under the sun, the first message arrived. When Marcus stepped out in the morning, there was a rope tied to the fence post. It was fastened with a simple knot, but the shape was unmistakably familiar. A hanging noose. No note, no name, but its meaning swayed in the wind like a dark promise. Marcus stared at it for a long time. Then he grabbed a hammer, removed the post, and threw the rope to the ground. His face said nothing, but his eyes made it clear there was no going back now. That day, while Lynn was hanging laundry, She found a red ribbon tangled in the barbed wire. May, while drawing water from the well, discovered the bucket filled with mud. When Daniel went to the barn in the morning, he found a dead rabbit nailed to the door. Its throat had been slit. Sue said nothing. She simply placed her knife on the table. "This won't be enough," she said. "Next time, they'll come inside." Marcus didn't respond. He just picked up his rifle and quietly began to clean it. Eric and Daniel did the same, pulling out weapons they hadn't touched in years. The glint of steel signaled that this house was no longer on the brink of peace, but war. That evening, everyone at the table was silent, until Marcus raised his cup. "To the storm," he said. Lynn looked him in the eyes and raised her own. "And to those who take root." One by one, they drank. Silence was sacred, but the silence of preparation carried a deeper meaning. At midnight, Sue slipped outside again. But this time, it wasn't to bury the past. She slowly crossed the back fences, walked under the moonlight, and at one point knelt down. She dug her hands into the soil. From the spot where she'd once buried it, she retrieved an oiled, ready pistol. But this time, she pressed it to her chest, not as a tool of escape, but as a vow to stay. In the morning, they woke to the sharp smell of smoke from the stove. But this smoke wasn't for breakfast, it was for war. Shane was the first to notice. His shirt soaked with sweat, he burst out of the house. "The barn," he shouted. Flames crept out from the edge of the roof like a red serpent. Peter, sorry, Marcus, was already at the hose. Lucas, water. Eric, blankets. Lynn, bring the buckets, he shouted. The girls jumped into action. Lynn grabbed the second bucket. May wiped ash from Eric's eye. And Sue, without a second thought, ran into the flames. "The horse is tied up," she screamed. Daniel tried to grab her arm. "Are you crazy?" But Sue locked eyes with him. "It's one of us." A brief pause. Then Daniel let go. Sue vanished into the smoke. Marcus turned the water pump so hard his wrists nearly cracked. Flames rose like they were swallowing the hay. Lucas climbed onto the roof and threw down a wet blanket. Eric kicked the burning door open, sparks igniting his shirt. May pulled him back, smothering the flames with his jacket. Then Sue came out, soaked in sweat, eyes full of smoke. But the horse was behind her, breathing, alive. "It didn't burn," Sue said. "Neither did you," said Daniel. Sue looked at him, her face covered in soot. "Not yet." After 2 hours, they put out the fire. But part of the barn had collapsed. In the dark, the smoldering beams rose into the sky like black ribs. Marcus dropped to his knees. His eyes burned, hands trembled, but he didn't cry. May quietly came to his side. She wiped the soot from his forehead with a small cloth. "We'll get through this too," she said. "No," said Marcus. This was just the beginning. Dinner that evening passed in silence again. But this time, everyone was looking each other in the eye. It wasn't the silence of shame, it was the silence of unity. That night, as Lynn helped Lucas into his patched shirt, she whispered, "I should have kissed you yesterday." Lucas paused. "It's not too late today." And he kissed her forehead, as if they were standing at the edge of a marriage that would last one day, or a lifetime. May, while bandaging Eric's burned arm, said, "I wish I could have taken the fire instead of you." Eric rested his head on her. "You already took part of it." Sue sat silently next to Daniel on the porch. She handed him a tin cup. "Why did you run into the flames?" Daniel asked. "For my father," said Sue. "When no one else would run, he'd run for me." Daniel lowered his head. "Then why'd you come back to this house?" Sue stared at him. "Because for the first time, someone didn't tell me I was too much. That's reason enough to stay." And that night, Marcus hung a tin cup on the remaining beams of the collapsed barn. The new ceremony site was ready. But at that same moment, the town was preparing for another ceremony. And that one wasn't for repentance. It was for punishment. The morning after the fire, the farm was quiet. But it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet that warns of an attack. Marcus sat on the porch, drinking his coffee, eyes fixed on the fence. Spring was supposed to have begun, but frost still clung to the ground. The cold wasn't just in the earth anymore. It was in people's hearts. That morning, there was no noose hanging from the fence. But something else had appeared. A piece of cloth. One word written in charcoal. "If you don't leave, we'll burn it." Marcus took the cloth, crumpled it, and tossed it into the stove. The flames devoured it, but the threat had already seeped into the walls of the house. This time, the silence was broken by resolve. "We need to hold the weddings now," said Marcus. The town wants to tear us apart before we're whole. No one disagreed. That day, Marcus's sons picked up hammers, saws, and planks and began to build a wedding platform in the still-standing section of the barn. Lucas cut the boards with a furrowed, determined brow. Eric sanded the edges, stealing quiet glances at May. Daniel hammered each nail while keeping his eyes fixed on the surrounding fields, checking if anyone was coming. The girls helped with what they had. Lynn drew delicate vine patterns along the edges of the wood. May stitched burgundy ribbons onto white fabric. Sue carved 3 simple rings from wood. Smooth, unadorned, but solid, just like their story. But the town wasn't idle either. That night, Sue came to Marcus's hearth and quietly watched him clean his rifle. "Do you think they'll come again?" she asked. Marcus, without lifting his eyes from the rifle's mechanism, answered, "They've already planned to." Sue sat down on the floor, legs stretched out. "The ones who bought me only taught me how to run. But you taught me how to fight." Marcus shook his head. "I just chose to stay." That night, the whole family gathered in the living room. Marcus stood by the hearth. His voice, like the fire, was steady and calm. "We're doing this soon. In God's presence, not the town's." Lucas nodded. Eric held May's hand. Daniel looked at Sue. She just raised her eyebrow and gave a familiar wink. That was her way of saying yes. Then Lynn spoke. "Last night I dreamed of a river," she said. "Cold and wide. We all crossed it barefoot." "What happened after?" asked Lucas. Lynn locked eyes with him. "We never looked back." When morning came, Marcus stepped out and didn't find a noose hanging from the fence. This time, it was on the ground. A stick driven into the dirt, a rope tied to the end. But the knot was different. Not just a knot, a noose. Hanging like a prophecy. That morning, the weddings were to be held. The girls wore the simple white dresses they had sewn themselves. Around their waists, each tied a dark red ribbon, symbolizing fire. No lace, no veils, but their posture carried a power stronger than any blessing. The barn was decorated with sage and corn husks. Light streamed through the half-finished beams, casting soft rays on the faces inside. But Marcus's eyes were fixed beyond the barn's entrance. Dust clouds were rising on the horizon. Riders approaching slowly, deliberately. Nearly a dozen. At the front, Pastor Wilhelm. Behind him, Mrs. Langley, a few familiar faces, and some newcomers. Guns on their shoulders. Expressions hard. Marcus took his hat, stepped away from the wedding site, and walked toward the fence. As the riders drew closer, the wind carried dust to his boots. "This is a home," said Marcus. "Not a battlefield." Wilhelm sneered. "Sin, wherever it happens, defiles sacred ground. We came to warn you." Marcus squinted. "Warnings don't come with rifles." Mrs. Langley called from her horse. "You mock God." Marcus turned to look at the barn. Inside, Lynn, May, and Sue stood watching him. He took another step. "God is in there," he said. "You brought the guns." Then Lucas appeared, holding a rifle, not on his shoulder, but in his hands, level with the ground. Eric and Daniel joined him. The girls stood in the barn doorway. Lynn stared directly into Mrs. Langley's eyes. May clung tightly to Eric. Sue carried nothing, but her gaze was enough. Her eyes were ice, the kind that silences people. Marcus turned back and gave his final words. "We're uniting in the presence of God, not with your permission. If someone stops you, it'll be him, not us." Pastor Wilhelm lowered his rifle from his shoulder. Mrs. Langley whispered, "Don't." Wilhelm hesitated. And then, the town sheriff stepped down from his horse, quietly walked over, and stood in front of Marcus. His hands were empty. "This isn't why I came," he said. Wilhelm growled, "You're a coward." The sheriff turned his head. "Last week a barn burned down. A boy was hit with a rock. I stayed silent. I won't today." And he stepped back. A few of the riders turned with him. The crowd began to thin, but the threat hadn't passed. It had only been postponed. Marcus turned and walked back into the barn. His eyes no longer held fear, only a decision. And the marriages were about to begin, a ceremony rejected by the town, but quietly approved by God. The barn was filled not with darkness, but with a determined silence. As Marcus held the delicately carved wooden rings Lynn had made, he knew they weren't just pieces of wood. They were signs of the whole journey. These rings symbolized a bond that wasn't bought, a love that hadn't run, and a fate embraced in defiance. 3 couples stood before Marcus. None of them trembled. There was no fear in their eyes, only clarity. This barn half collapsed and stained with smoke, had become a temple. "Speak," said Marcus. "Now or forever hold your peace." Lucas turned to Lynn. His hands didn't shake, but his voice carried the weight of many silent years. "Since my mother died, I haven't been sure of anything. But the first moment I saw you, in your walk, in your resistance, I saw a home. A home that didn't make me feel in debt. If you'll have me, I want to rebuild its roof with you." Lynn didn't lower her head. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "I've known many men, but only you saw me with my eyes. I'm ready." When the rings slipped onto fingers, the silence the town had taught them cracked. It was Eric and May's turn. Eric knelt with the sincerity of a child. "I've always been bad at talking, but even in silence with you, I feel everything. Your voice taught me how to listen. If you'll let me, let's grow words together." May touched his forehead. She whispered a few words in her own language. Then she said, "The word for sky is the same in your language and mine. That means sometimes distant things meet in the same place." "Yes." Sue stood last. She held no ring. Daniel took one step forward, then stopped. "I didn't come to change you," he said. "I just want to stay by your side. Most people saw you as a threat, but I saw you as a refuge." Sue raised an eyebrow, a look both mocking and warm. "I thought I scared you." "You did," Daniel said. "But that doesn't stop love." Sue took the simple ring from Marcus's hand and slid it onto her finger. "Then we started with fear, but we'll end with stubbornness." Marcus touched each of their hands. "Bear witness," he said. "These marriages were built not by law, but by resolve. And God saw what happened under this roof." Outside the door, no one clapped. But there was an echo in the silence. Beyond the edge of the farm, a group of townspeople watched quietly. Some removed their hats, some cried, some lowered their heads and walked away. A little girl let go of her mother's hand and waved to May from afar. The first cracks had appeared, right there. That night, for the first time, they all sat at the same table. Old plates, chipped cups, bread smelling of smoke. But nothing was missing from the table. Lucas whispered to Lynn while holding her hand. "The world might still be cruel, but with you, I feel good." May leaned on Eric's shoulder and showed him a small wooden horse. "You made this. I'll keep it for our child." Sue stepped outside. Daniel followed. Neither of them spoke. They looked up at the sky. A wolf howled in the distance. "I won't run anymore," said Sue. "But if anyone comes near this home again, I'll be the first they face." Daniel nodded. "If you're there, I'm with you." Just before dawn, Marcus walked to the edge of the fence. As the sun rose, he looked at the post where the noose had once hung. Now, there was a bouquet of flowers. No one knew who left it, but it was the first sign that not everyone in the town agreed. That day, Marcus hung a small sign on the porch. On a nailed-down wooden board, burned into the surface, were the words. They weren't bought. They stayed. The wind blew. But this time, it carried not threat, but hope. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.